Welcome to your next science notebook page with the one, the only 5 cents nickel here to teach a little bit about your body, more specifically about red blood cells, which have an awesome role in our body. These things are super duper cool. So let's learn about red blood cells. So you can go ahead and title your page Red Blood Cells. You can see we're going to be doing some drawing here on this page, quite a bit of drawing to show exactly how red blood cells work and are really the players in our circulatory and respiratory system so that both of those things can achieve their jobs. So let's get to it here. Red blood cells. Red blood cells are going to be part of our circulatory and respiratory system, like I said. And so what we're going to start writing here is that the lungs, that was the organ that is important for the respiratory system, and our heart, which is the organ that's important for the circulatory system. The lungs and heart work together like best buds, like besties. They work together to deliver oxygen and extract waste. And that's primarily in the form of CO2. So that's a good thing to add there, is that waste is in our body is essentially CO2. Now let's draw a model of what's actually happening. Now it's a model because we're not going to draw real lungs and a real heart, but let's draw some shapes to kind of show what it is that's happening. So I'm going to draw two air sacs here that are going to be our lungs. And I'm just going to draw kind of a circle here in the middle that's going to be our heart. So I'm going to label these so that I can remember if I have to come back to this page that this middle thing's our heart, this is our lung, and this is also a lung. We have two of those. Okay. Well, what happens is that, let's get a new color here. Veins and arteries are the vessels that we have in our body. They're our blood vessels. And a vein is something that transports our waste. So they're like the garbage truck or the garbage river, I guess you could say, because things flow through it. So a vein transports waste away from cells and actually to our lungs. It's pretty crazy. We actually use our lungs to get rid of a lot of our waste. So that means that we're breathing out our waste. Interesting. We'll talk more about that later. But if you've watched the video about how we lose weight and you know that we breathe out carbon dioxide, we breathe out the fat that we burn, well, our veins are what transport that waste away from our lungs so we can get it out of our body. So veins come into the heart. And so I'm going to draw two arrows coming into the heart because we have there's two main veins that are coming into our heart to bring that blood that was in our cells to transport the waste to get rid of it. So once the veins enter our heart, they then are forced into our lungs. And when the veins go into the lungs, they drop off their waste. They pick up the nutrients. When they pick up the nutrients, which we call oxygen and other nutrients, they then enter back into the heart. So then they can be pumped out of our heart and into the rest of our body. So the things that transport oxygen, which is good for us, and nutrients, which our cells also need. The thing that transports oxygen and nutrients to our cells, these are what we call arteries. Let's say arteries. Okay, so arteries transport the good stuff and veins transport the bad stuff. But it's important to know that veins push blood into the heart. The blood goes from the heart, it's forced into the lungs because we got to get rid of that CO2 and put it into our lungs from the blood. It picks up the oxygen in our lungs and then it goes out into the rest of our body to drop the oxygen off at the cells. Okay, so let's label our arteries up here to know that we have these arteries on the top. All right, so let's look and let's dig a little bit deeper and let's look at the role that these red blood cells play. Because I told you in the beginning, we're going to be talking about red blood cells and that they're a really important player. So let's look at how the red blood cell actually is the thing that allows all of this to happen. So RBC, yeah, you know me, stands for red blood cells. Okay, so again, we're talking about the respiratory and circulatory system, which are bigger systems in our body. And they need cells in order for this all to work, because our whole body is made out of cells, and cells are what allow us to be complex and allow a lot of cool stuff to happen. So we're going to look at what specifically red blood cells do. Well, red blood cells are what carry the oxygen. It's like they have a little backpack that they can put oxygen into. That backpack is actually not a real backpack, but they have this stuff called hemoglobin. And they transport the oxygen using hemoglobin, which is like a giant oxygen magnet, to our cells. Okay, oxygen goes to our cells. But then they actually do a second job. They release the carbon dioxide, which is the waste product, from the cells. So they take it from the cells to get rid of it. They carry oxygen to the cells to help it. Now, red blood cells are crazy because they don't have all the organelles that a generic cell might have. They definitely don't have the organelles that a muscle cell has, or a lot of other cells in our body have either. They're very unique. They actually don't even have a nucleus. Why, you might ask? Well, guess what? It gives them more room to carry more oxygen. Yeah, that's right. The more oxygen they can carry, the more efficient they are, and that helps our body because our body needs the oxygen in order to survive. So let's get rid of that nucleus to provide more room. And that's what red blood cells have done. Now, they also don't have mitochondria. And if you remember, muscles have tons of mitochondria because they need to convert oxygen into energy. So therefore, red blood cells can't create energy because they don't have mitochondria. But this is really good because mitochondria are really, really oxygen hungry. They use up oxygen to make energy. So if we need the red blood cell to transport the oxygen to the cells, we don't want it to use up the thing that it's transporting along the way. So without having mitochondria, this is really good too because it doesn't use or even need the oxygen that it carries throughout our blood vessels. So red blood cells are unique for a lot of reasons, but two things is they don't have a nucleus and they don't have mitochondria, which helps them do their job even better because they can carry more oxygen and then they don't use the oxygen that they actually carry. All right, well, again, let's draw a model of our lungs. So let's just kind of review here. We've got our larynx that comes down and splits into our bronchi. Those bronchi then split into smaller tubules here, and that's where they enter the lungs. So we've got our lungs here too. I'll draw the dashed lines. And then behind this, we have our heart back there, which I'll just shade in to show that our heart's back there. But the thing that we really want to focus on is right here at the end of these little tubes. If we were to zoom into there, we would end up finding a structure that's called the alveoli. It's not ravioli, it's alveoli. And an alveoli is one of the most important structures in our body because it allows us to take the oxygen that we breathe in and use it and breathe out the waste, our CO2. And it kind of looks like this. It's just kind of a bulb here, but it's got a lot of different bulbs that are all attached to this tube because in each bulb is where the gas exchange is happening. So let's zoom in. Now we need to draw that alveoli structure. So let's draw here. Actually, let's give ourselves some more space. Alveoli. Old alveoli. Okay, we're drawing this here, and we're going to zoom in so we can really see what's happening. So here's my alveoli, and like I said, it's kind of like a multi-roomed house, but we're just looking at one of these little bulbs here, and each alveoli is honestly only one cell thick. Now this is important because then it actually allows, because if we have too many cells, then the oxygen can't jump into our blood and the CO2 can't jump out of our blood. So it allows that gas, the CO2 and O2, it allows gas exchange between air, which we breathe in, and blood, which is like the river that takes everything to our body. So our alveoli is where the oxygen enters. So let's draw that. Let's get some blue here for our O2. Our O2, or our oxygen, comes in here when we take a deep breath in. And so we end up having a bunch of O2 in our alveoli. I'm going to use circles to show the O2. And when it comes in, it needs to get to our blood. So what happens is our body actually has these blood vessels that come right by the alveoli. All of the alveoli have blood vessels that come right next to it. So let's label that as our blood vessel. And here come our red blood cells. Our red blood cells come in to our blood vessel and pass our alveoli. And this is where they drop off the CO2 and they pick up the oxygen. So I'm just going to draw a bunch of red blood cells here as they come on by. And again, they are dropping off, let's use like a brown color for this. They're dropping off the CO2. And I'll use a box to show the CO2. So they drop off the CO2 into our alveoli. And then the CO2 exits our alveoli and we breathe that out. So when we breathe in this oxygen here, the oxygen then goes into the red blood cells, and the red blood cells then can exit our body and take it off to the rest of our cells in our body. So there you have it. Our alveoli are really, really important because they allow the oxygen we breathe in to get onto the red blood cells, and it also allows the process of CO2 to jump into the alveoli where we can exhale that waste product, which is our CO2. So you have millions of these alveoli in every single lung, and that's what allows you to use the oxygen you breathe and to breathe out that waste, which is CO2. Is your mind blown? I hope so. But hey, shout out to all those red blood cells out there. You're doing good work. Keep it real, y'all.